With that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Kevin Johnson, the CEO of Juniper Networks. Kevin? So you took over 3 years ago, and in the context that I just gave, this was the notion of a network, networking equipment, et cetera, was, I would say, a relatively well understood thing. And then suddenly everything changed, from the economy to the rise of these trends that we've just described. In the last 3 years, how has your vision of what a network means and how you play in it changed?
Well, I think, clearly you pointed out that a lot has happened on the web over the last 20 years. I mean, 20 years ago, I think there were 100 million users of the World Wide Web. Today, there's 2.1 billion. $8 trillion of commerce is transacted over the internet on a global basis. You've seen trends like Facebook go from 0 to 600 million users in a 7-year period. And so the last 20 years has been this sort of foundation for what people expect, and the network now is woven into the socioeconomic fabric of the world we live in. But the three market trends that you highlighted, mobile internet, cloud computing, and this video tsunami that's taking place, those three trends are accelerating, and those three trends, I think, will be the mega trends for the next decade. Those three trends have significant implications on the network and other aspects. Will the legacy approach to networking be able to carry the volume of traffic efficiently and enable these scenarios? Policy questions around things like net neutrality, new business models that will emerge. And so I think we're at this inflection point where there are a lot of opportunities for innovation, a lot of need for innovation, and a lot of questions about how this will unfold over the next decade. And so that's where we as a company have been focused.
Of those three, some of them represent opportunities and others threats. Let's start with the threats. What worries you most when you look at the really unexpected inflection points that we've just encountered as a company?
Well, let me just start as an industry, and then I'll translate that to our company. But as an industry, over the last 20 years, there's been economic incentive for the investment in capital to build the infrastructure to carry this traffic. And that economic incentive is a function of certainly the revenues that service providers have derived from internet data connections and the capital investment required. The analysis we've done, though, says that traffic is just increasing at such an exponential rate. And even with the pace of innovation that's taken place over the next decade, we think there's an inflection point where investment starts to exceed the revenue derived. And so economic disincentive is a potential risk that the industry faces. So the questions are, can technology companies innovate at a faster pace to carry the volume of traffic? Can innovation enable new business models and new services that address unique needs for consumers and businesses? And how will we continue to address this insatiable demand for people to be networked? And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for the industry, and I think there's a lot of risk if the industry doesn't rise to the occasion and sort of embrace the fact that new approaches are required to handle these trends.
It's often been said that we've been coasting over the past decade over on the overinvestment in infrastructure made during the first .com bubble. All that dark fiber that was laid in, with NASDAQ, money and all that. It's now said that we're in a new bubble, but the difference between that bubble and this bubble is that A, it doesn't have the same sort of public market volume, and B, it's typically not focused on data infrastructure itself. What will the funding sources be for that next required, massive investment in the physical networks itself?
Well, in a free economy, an open economy, it has to be economic incentive. It has to be people will invest because there's opportunity for them to get a return on that investment. And so there's plenty of capital to go. There's access to capital to make these investments, but the question is there the economic incentive? So it's part of the risks and the opportunity for a company like Juniper. we've got to be leading edge innovators. We've got to be leading edge innovators in a way that differentiates the approach from the legacy network and unlocks value for customers. We've got to find ways to continue to reduce the cost per bit of traffic that is carried on these networks. We've got to find ways to address the cybersecurity concerns that can become a barrier to adoption. We've got to find ways to enable new scenarios that recognize you've got more untethered mobile users that are demanding and want to participate in more scenarios like video and online gaming. And so we've got to be at the forefront of enabling those scenarios, and we can't do it alone. We have to do it through an ecosystem of partnerships. I mean, we're focused on a certain element of innovation, but we recognize that innovation comes from a lot of different places. And so being a member of that ecosystem, engaging in the dialogue, sharing the innovation that we have, embracing the innovation that others have, we think that by creating that environment, we can at least play a role in contributing to the solutions to some of these challenges.
Let me focus on the shift in mobility in particular. What we saw with the wired internet, the fixed line internet, is that by and large, the big last mile providers, the Comcasts of the world, are dumb pipes. That's all we need from them is pure bandwidth. And we pay handsomely for it. I think it's a good business, but it's a dumb pipe. We're not looking for them we're not going to their websites and expecting them to provide, the content and the internet content. They're just transport. The cell phone carriers, however, have traditionally been much more value-added networks. We pay them for services, and traditionally we have had to go through them for many of the features. As we shift to the iPhone model, the iPad model, et cetera, do you think that the wireless networks will become smarter or dumber?
Well, first of all, I think Comcast might disagree with you. With their investment in NBC Universal, I think they would argue they're more than dumb pipes in terms of the content and the video assets they bring to the table. But certainly every service provider is focused on a unique strategy that's relevant to them. And I think for your question about wireless, I think clearly my view in working with service providers around the world is they're driving an agenda to have the wireless services they deliver become smarter and a richer set of services. And it's not just about carrying the traffic, it's about carrying the traffic and enabling a set of scenarios that delivers value to the end user, whether it's a consumer or a business. And so there's a lot of innovation that is happening in service providers to experiment with new scenarios and deliver new services, and some of them will work and some won't. But I think the trend is for smarter networks.
Well, I certainly understand that's what they want. But I mean, in the tension, the Apples of the world would like these services to be provided by the device itself, so that voice and voicemail being a perfect example. Voicemail wants to be a visual voicemail on the phone, an internet-provided service. The carrier would like voicemail to be a service on the network you pay for. In that tension between the device makers and the networks themselves, how do you predict or plan for who will win?
Yeah, I don't think you can plan for who wins. I think and I think that tension is healthy, because that's what drives innovation. It's competition. It's whoever invents the best scenario. The consumers will vote, with their choices in terms of whose services they use and what they sign up for. And if the consumer says, "Hey, we like the Comcast video offering," or they say, "Hey, we prefer Apple TV with Netflix," or we have a PlayStation game console that delivers our Netflix video, I think you're going to have a range of offerings, and at the end of the day, that competition is healthy. It's a healthy thing, because that's what will lead to innovation.
Let's turn to the living room now. The rise of the sort of connected television, the smart TVs, the game, the Xboxes, and the dedicated set-top boxes, et cetera. Would you predict that 5 years from now, people will have in fact cut the cord and be getting all of their content over IP rather than paying for dedicated cable services?
Well, first of all, the digital video or IP video consumption that's happening today, statistic I saw earlier this week was 80% of that is now being viewed on television sets. Now, certainly the fact that Netflix, you can get Netflix streaming video to your gaming console or being built into TVs, the TV still is the preferred device for people to view video. And the distribution of that video is all shifting to IP. Mm-hmm. It's the most cost-effective way to deliver that volume of data in a user on-demand scenario. And so, our experience is we see every service provider working to converge networks and shift everything to an IP packet switch delivery of that content.
Well, I guess I'm thinking more in terms of the two parts of my bill. The cable TV part of the bill and the internet service part of the bill. What sort of shift do you see there? Are we going to see more people sort of saying, you know what, I'm going to cancel the cable TV part and just take it all over internet?
Well, I think for the next 5 years, you're going to see both. Mm-hmm. I watch the video over the top, but I haven't canceled any of my cable TV choices either. So I pay for both. And maybe I'm an atypical consumer, but in our household, we pay for both.
You're still typical, and I think the actual trends are sort of really on the margins at the moment, but the direction seems to be head that way.
But there is the scenario of here's the video you want to watch on demand, whether it's a television show that you didn't watch live or a movie that you want to download. The convenience of that is a very nice thing, and that's not going to go away. That's going to increase for sure. And so then the question is, will people continue to consume other video services that they consume today? And I think they're going to consume both.
Let me turn to the last trend, the cloud. Between Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, and now Apple's iCloud service, how does that change your world?
Well, in every one of those cases, those companies are building massive data centers to do the compute and storage and deliver those services. And that, whether you call that cloud computing, private clouds or public clouds, the inflection point of how technology comes together to enable those scenarios is a big opportunity for us. And the reason the market moves that way is it's driving economic advantage. First you centralize, then you virtualize, which gives you better utilization of assets, and then you automate. And by doing that, you can deliver these phenomenal scenarios from a more central location at a much lower cost. But in order to do that, it's creating opportunity for how all of those devices are connected together, how they're managed, the speed and performance, the reliability. It creates questions about security. How do you secure, cybersecurity, I think, and privacy will be two of the top policy issues and considerations over this next decade. And how do you secure those scenarios? How do you enable them at high performance, high reliability? And so in every one of those cases, those are all customers of ours that we're engaged with, helping with solutions and finding ways to advance the state of the art in cloud computing.
I mentioned at the start that you're now been doing this job for 3 years. We've talked about what an interesting time this was to take over and how many changes are happening simultaneously. What's been the biggest surprise for you?
Over the last 3 years?
Yeah.
Probably the speed at which the mobile internet has shifted over the last 3 years. And I kind of look at the inflection point that the iPhone created. Just the innovation around the touch capability on the screen, the ability to have a full browsing experience, and then all of the new content consumption applications that followed. So iPhone, Android, iPad, this tablet explosion. If you just track the adoption of smartphones versus feature phones over the last 10 years and then look at the last 3 years, the data I saw that shows this year that smartphones will now exceed shipments of feature phones, which the tipping point occurred in the last 24 months. And at the same time, this transition for video is occurring. So you have two major inflection points of consumer behavior happening that is driving huge demands in the technology infrastructure. And I think the surprise was that happened during this period of a recession when you would have thought, okay, when the macro economy, goes into some challenges in 2009, you would have thought, okay, that's going to slow any technology trends or consumer trends. No, it actually accelerated some things, and that was a surprise.
One last question, I'll make it a quick one. We've been talking about the sort of the transfer of services to IP, and Skype is a great example of this. As you know, Microsoft has bid to buy Skype. If you were Steve Ballmer, what would you do with Skype?
If I were Steve Ballmer, what would I do with Skype? Well, look, if I invested $8.5 billion in a technology, I would make sure that that technology gets woven into every user experience that it could be delivered, whether it's on Xbox, on Windows Phone. And I would also look to leverage it as a way to bootstrap a set of complementary cloud services. It's the basic communication, whether it's voice or video teleconference communication, is a core asset that you can now build a set of things around. And certainly they've got a set of assets that I think are very complementary to it, but it'll be a question of how well they integrate that and start to really change the paradigm of the way that people connect and communicate and collaborate.
Terrific. Please join me in thanking Kevin Johnson.